The following program deals with a controversial subject. The theories expressed are not the only possible interpretation. Viewers are invited to make a judgment based on all available information.
This is your captain speaking. We are beginning our descent into madness.
Open your mind.
Yeah. By the sound of that, you know it's time for West of the Rockies right here on the Independent FM. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's late for some of you, but we got a really, really spooky show lined up for everyone tonight. Genevieve, how you doing over there? What was that?
Sorry?
What?
No,
what?
I was doing the effects in the background. Really spooky. That's generally
something.
what I do in the back when someone's doing
I know.
EVP.
That's why we don't take you along anymore. Thanks for everyone. All right. Thanks to everybody that's sending in tonight. We really appreciate your support. And everyone listening to the podcasted version of the show, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, sir, madam, and all that good stuff. Tonight, we had the chance to interview, actually, a really cool dude.
This is one of the few times we can say in advance, it's going to be a great interview.
It's going to be a great interview.
And we know it's going to be great because we already did it.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. The first time I heard about Barry Conrad was a few years back, browsing the internet. I came across a documentary.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I came across a documentary on ghosts and hauntings. And it was a type of documentary where they had a handful of cases that they presented. And there was one case in there about this small bungalow home in San Pedro, California. About 25 minutes away from where we are in downtown LA. And it was such a strange case because it was a single mom with, two infants. And she was in this house where strange things were happening. So she gets in touch with this team. And Barry Conrad was a member of this team. He was the cameraman. And along with a parapsychologist by the name of Barry Taff and Jeff Wheatfield.
Yeah.
The three of them went to this house to try and figure out what was happening, right? And it looks like as soon as the cameras started rolling, things were happening, right?
The bizarre thing is, I feel that even when the cameras weren't rolling, there was really weird stuff happening. So what the cameras did capture was still just a fraction of what they actually experienced.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part.
And I remember that was a while back. Like I said, it was a few years ago, and I always remember that case, and, maybe a year or two later, I came across the full-length documentary just on the San Pedro case, and that really blew my mind. Fast forward to, I think about a week and a half ago, and we were at our good friend's Ernie's house, who has a selection of books on these topics, and I saw that there was something about the San Pedro Haunting case, and I told him, hey, I remember this actually was really interesting, and I asked to borrow the book, and I got in touch with Barry, and he was down to do the show. He is a very, very busy guy, always working on different projects. When you go to his IMDb, you notice that he's actually done quite a few projects based on paranormal cases, and he focuses on the cases where they're, in his words, have substance, right? Where there's more than one eyewitness, where there's some kind of evidence. And we talked to him about how he got involved and how he goes about capturing this evidence, and they've gotten, balls of light and weird sounds like footsteps.
I've watched in his documentaries, etc. is, I'd like to say, some of the most convincing evidence I've seen, and that's not even first-hand. I mean, that's third-hand watching his documentaries.
We definitely encourage people to check out Barry Conrad's work after the show. So, Genevieve, if you would be so kind to introduce our guest for the night as we get ready to take a spooky stroll down the scary lane. So grab your pillow, your teddy bear, your significant other, because this one's going to be a spooky one. Genevieve, if you would.
Tonight we have Barry Conrad on the show. Barry is a cinematographer and producer who has served as director of photography in the television industry on a myriad of features to date. Having commenced his broadcast career with Nick Clooney, that's George Clooney's father for those of you who don't know, in Ohio back in the 70s, Mr. Conrad is primarily known for the the TV shows California's Most Haunted, Monsters of the UFO, and Valentino's Ghost. From interviews with the world's top political leaders such as President Ronald Reagan, to icons such as Steven Spielberg, to the world's richest people such as Bill Gates, Barry Conrad's camera work really does span decades of diverse projects. For the past 20 years, he's not only shot but also produced several documentary features under the banner of his own BARCON Video Productions. So with that, I'm very honored to be able to introduce Barry Conrad onto West of the Rockies Radio.
Hey, Barry, thank you so much for being on the show tonight. We really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're quite a busy guy doing a lot of work out here in LA and the surrounding areas. You have quite an extensive list of credits. How did you get into this whole paranormal business and wanting to document it?
Yeah, originally I grew up in Ohio, southern Ohio, and my mother had a friend named Pauline, and there was a time when she just bought a brand new house. Actually, when I say brand new, it was an old farmhouse, actually, but she was renovating it. Mm-hmm. And they started having furniture move around. You know, they'd come home and furniture be rearranged, and they'd smell strange odors like smoke, yet there were no evidence of any fires or anything like that. And one night her son almost jumped out of a window, said he was being asphyxiated by, like visible smoke. And that kind of impressed me because she wound up moving out of the house. And I knew her because she was a good friend of my mother's, as I mentioned. And she was not at all the type of person to fabricate anything. And this really kind of restructured her creative processes and thinking along the lines of that kind of subject matter. I don't think she had any belief pattern whatsoever in the paranormal or anything like that. So I started reading more and more about the subject, and I got interested in it. But again, I was just like, you or I or anyone else that had never had experience, would that ever happen to me? No, I never dreamed anything like that would happen to me. And what I ever encountered, and later I became a cameraman, a professional cameraman. And when I moved to LA in 1986, I met a gentleman named Dr. Barry Taff, and he was a guy who had set up a parapsychology lab at UCLA under the auspices of Dr. Thelma Moss, who wrote a book years ago called Probability of the Impossible. And I think they were doing ESP research, telekinetic research, but they one of the things that they were really fascinated with was the subject of haunted houses, poltergeist phenomena. Mm-hmm. And so that's really kind of what actually how I got on the bandwagon with this, because I realized he had been a researcher, and there was a movie that he had been involved with that he actually based his character on. It was called The Entity. Does that ring a bell? Do you remember that movie?
Yeah. I heard the name of that movie before. Quite a scary case.
Yeah, he was involved with another fellow named Kerry Gaynor. They were investigating a small bungalow over here in Culver City where a woman said she had been attacked and even raped by an invisible force. Wow. And they made that movie about it, and that starred Barbara Hershey, and it came out in '83. And I wasn't at that case, but little did I know that later on we would become involved in a case very similar to that. Although there was no rape involved or anything like that, but it was a single woman, divorcee, with children, mm-hmm. and living under very similar circumstances, a small kind of lower middle class home bungalow, and very similar circumstances started happening. And once that case got out, it was known as the San Pedro Haunting. That was my tour de force of, as far as experiencing a plethora of phenomena. That really convinced me that the phenomenon was real.
Let's talk about that for a moment, the San Pedro Haunting, because that's really how I became familiar with your work. This was a case that to this day, you can go to YouTube and watch the videos, you can read the comments, and people are still perplexed by it, fascinated by it, scared by it. How did you guys meet Jackie Hernandez, and how did that meeting come about? Did she reach out to you guys? Were you guys doing paranormal research, and, did she look you guys up in the yellow pages? How did that happen?
Yeah, well, frankly, it's kind of interesting. Barry Taft got the call first, and actually it wasn't Jackie that called him. It was her friend, Susan Castaneda. She was a neighbor and a friend that lived near her, and she started seeing phenomena Like she saw a lamp fly off a shelf, of its own volition. And Jackie, I think at that time, even though she was having incredible experiences, she was a little bit nervous about calling anyone. She thought, the usual thing back then, like right now, it's a lot more prevalent with all these TV shows and all these ghost hunting groups that have sprung up over the past 10, 15 years. But back then, it was a little more dicey. People were a little more reticent about calling people because they didn't want to be labeled a kook or, psychologically deluded or something like that. And so that's how we got on the bandwagon of that. Barry called me in, and, he knew that my objective was, as a cameraman, I thought, well, it's one thing to hear these stories. So I did a number of cases with him even before San Pedro, where we heard a lot of really good stories from people who had these experiences. But while there was nothing wrong with the experiences they were talking about, but I wanted to see something for myself, and I also wanted to document it from a cameraman standpoint. And I thought, well, I had quite a bit of news experience. I was a news cameraman at ABC and NBC in Denver. And starting in Cincinnati, I used to work with George Clooney's father. I was a stats cameraman in the 70s. And when you do news, you're trained to get the story.
Right.
And I thought, okay, well, as a news camera guy, I have that background. I was a journalism major in college. I went to Miami University in Oxford. And taking a journalistic approach, taking a cameraman's approach, I wanted to try to see if we could get some kind of empirical evidence, on video. And indeed, in the San Pedro case, we got more than we bargained for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, that honestly it's an understatement when you look at the amount of video that you guys capture while there. Now, one of the interesting things about this case is the level of activity. I mean, you really don't hear too much about a poltergeist-like phenomena very often, and I was surprised that this would happen in a small little suburb like San Pedro. What was it about this house? Was the house haunted? Was Jackie herself the one that was haunted, if you will, the one that was being followed around? What was going on? Who were the entities that were causing all this trouble?
Yeah, that's a good question, Frank. It's gone through my mind. I know Dr. Taft has addressed this a bit. He was under the impression that maybe that perhaps it was her that was haunted, that was maybe, creating the phenomena or something like that. Because there's an old, theory among a lot of parapsychologists. It's called the RSPK, recurrent spontaneous psychokinetic theory, that a lot of phenomena is generated by the sort of hidden consciousness within the mind itself. And a lot of times they believe that, and I'm not denying this, it could happen, perhaps it does happen with, in a number of cases, that in the case of a prepubescent young girl, and usually it is a young girl, in a lot of the cases there is a lot of random, I would call it more random psychokinetic phenomena. Maybe an object falls over or a table slightly moves, something like that. So the theory is that, perhaps there is a little bit of hormonal energy being given out, and it somehow operates on a psychokinetic basis, a physical level. I don't think, after experiencing the San Pedro case firsthand, I don't really think that was the case, because even long after Jackie had moved out, let me think, back in 2004, because she moved out in 89, there was still phenomena going on. And there was a family named the Lona family that moved out because they had encountered unseen forces in that house. And when I went back to be interviewed by a reporter, we went up into the attic, and we had so many other phenomena happen originally, and the cameraman's camera jam, of course, that could have been a mechanical error or something, but there were also photographs that I took outside the house in broad daylight where we picked up these kind of misty looking objects moving outside of the house in broad daylight, which I think was very interesting. And when I came back to my home at the time, there was a couple photographs I had taken like a day after that, just around the house. It was a Halloween season, just taking some random pictures. And I picked up a very bright comet of light streaking across the living room area. So it's convinced me that, at least that case convinced me that this was something under intelligent design. And it was still operating in the house as of 2004. Nowadays, I don't know, but back then, I hardly believe that a phenomenon was generated by an individual, even long after that individual's gone, would still have been in the house.
Could you maybe tell us a little about the connections that, were made? For instance, Damon, who seems to be someone they found had maybe died there years before.
Oh, right. Well, when you asked about San Pedro earlier, Frank, there is a lot of history to San Pedro as far as it had a very bad reputation back at the turn of the century, especially in the 30s during the Depression years. There's a street down there called Beacon Street, and that was kind of the center for prostitution, brothels, and bars and saloons. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of killings and murders, homicides, that kind of thing. So it is a seedy area. There are parts of it. If you go down there, even in '89, even today, I think, if you're susceptible to energy and you go into that town, you sort of get a feeling, like when you go to an old town, you just pick up on that energy. And that town, it reeks with kind of a sordidness about it. There's a lot of quaintness about San Pedro. You got a nice area down there. You got the harbor, and you got, you got the area where you got the cruise ships and all that, cruise lines. But there's a history of that town. Now, you had asked about, Genevieve, you had asked about John Damon. Well, when we did some research, we did find out that there was a man named John Damon that was the first owner of the house. The house was built in 1905, and he did die in the house. I don't have any evidence that he died of any kind of, trauma or homicide or anything like that. I think he died of natural causes. But there was an interesting bit of phenomena that happened with Jackie. She was over at Susan's house, and Susan lived right next door to a cemetery. I believe it was off of 21st or 22nd Street. It's called the Harborview Cemetery. And one day they had called me and they said that they had seen a ball of light, and that the ball of light had floated within this bedroom, Susan's bedroom, and they saw it. This is in daylight. Flew out of the window, and they went out of the house and followed it into Harborview Cemetery, and the object had hovered over this certain grave, and it was the gravesite of this gentleman named John Damon. I believe he died in 1912. And when I did research, I don't think they knew it at the time, but after I did a title search on the house, it was really interesting because John Damon was the first owner of that very house on 11th Street. 593 West 11th Street, where this all took place.
No, that's fascinating.
Whether to say John was the one haunting it, it's hard to say because there were other voices heard of a woman. I even heard disembodied voices of a woman one night, and a man sounded like they were arguing. These voices were disembodied coming from the attic itself. So I don't know. There could have been more involvement because there was a lot of history to that house, I'm sure, because it was, again, it was in a neighborhood where a lot of seamen had lived. I'm sure a lot of low-life types had been involved in that neighborhood operating at one time. So very interesting stuff, though, the John Damon incident.
Am I correct in remembering as well that there were a lot of occurrences of burning smells or, physical combustion, and that was somehow connected to a building burning down in that same spot?
I don't remember the burning thing, but there was the very first night, August 8th, 89, when we walked into that house, there was a very strong, overpowering smell of iodine.
Okay.
And it was coming from the laundry room. And if you go above the laundry room, we had this little crawl space door entrance to the attic, and it was very, very strong, and all of a sudden it just dissipated. There was after she moved, this entity had followed Jackie, and there was an incident where a blanket or a bedspread or something had been burned. And when you look at the burn marks, it looks like two eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And that was kind of scary. So they did smell smoke in that place. Maybe that's what you're thinking about. But the original house, Iodine, and that was interesting because iodine is a byproduct of kelp. And where does kelp come from? Kelp comes from the ocean. The sea. Again, there's that sea kind of element or link to this whole thing. It's really interesting.
In that case, could you just tell us a little about some of the happenings in her next home, which seem to have hinted, or, well, not just hinted, pointed to a specific person or two people during a Ouija board incident?
Well, after she moved out of the house, it had originally hanged my sound man in the attic in the original house, and then she moved out of the house, and she moved to a place called Weldon. She had gotten back temporarily, briefly, with her ex-husband. His name was Al, and he got her up to a trailer home, which is 300 miles north, up by a little town called Weldon. But she was on a dirt road and middle of nowhere, and it was a very, very isolated, remote area. It was called Chucker Street, Chukkar. And this all happened in '89. She moved out in the fall, and then we thought, Jeff and I. Jeff was the other researcher who had been attacked a number of times. That was the most, amazing thing that happened during that whole case. He was an extreme skeptic before that. Well, I had called him about going up to Weldon because, lo and behold, I started getting calls from Jackie, and she said that this ghost had followed her. So I thought, well, I didn't know whether to believe that or not at the time. I thought, well, maybe she's having some kind of PTSD or something, And,
Yeah.
But he was very good sport about it because this was 5 months down the road, and he agreed to go up there. And we went up there to Weldon on, believe it or not, we didn't plan it that way, but it was Friday the 13th, April 13th, 1990. And we got up there kind of late. We had been working earlier that day, and we went up, and it was around 11 o'clock. And we interviewed a gentleman named, can't think of his name offhand, but he lived next door. And he and his wife had reported seeing an apparition of an old man, which is the same thing that Jackie had seen in the original house in San Pedro. And so we were talking to him, and we had a camera set up behind the home, focused in on a little storage shed because Jeff had seen a shadow moving through the shed right when we first got there. And she said this entity was coming through a Ouija board. And it's kind of a no-no in a lot of ghost terms because a lot of people are afraid to use it. But at that time, I thought, well, I really didn't know a lot about Ouija boards, but I thought, well, if it's communicating with her, I wanted to see something for myself. And so we sat down, Jeff and I, and then there was a babysitter named Tina. She stood there in the room and was watching all of this. And Jackie sat to our left, and unfortunately our camera equipment was neutralized, which happened up in the attic the very first night in San Pedro. So all of our equipment was knocked out, but it was too bad because we got a lot of things. I did pick up an amazing, bullet of light shooting into the shed just before the Ouija board section. And right away, the room got cold. The temperature dropped maybe 25, 30 degrees. And the table started shaking violently, and it started communicating with us. And it communicated all sorts of things. Said it was a ghost, that he was murdered, held under water in 1930 in Pedro Bay. And he said we asked, how did he die? And he said, held underwater. And I asked it, did you drown? And it said no. And again, the cable was bouncing up and down, and then it would settle, and it said murder, M-U-R-D-E-R. Wow. And at one point, he said he was full of hatred. He was not at rest. He said, I must grieve always. I'm doomed to wander. And I asked him how many ghosts reside among the earth, and he said, phantoms fill the skies around you. And I asked him if there was anyone there that he hated. And he spelled out J-E-F-F, Jeff's name. And at that point, Jeff was levitated in front of me and 2 other witnesses, and he was hurtled into the ceiling where the wall meets the ceiling. And it happened just as if he were hit by lightning. And that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Fortunately, he survived. But he survived. He was dazed. He was knocked out for a few minutes, and he came to. But I've never seen it like that. It was such power. And the candles on the table were going out one by one, and she relighted them, and they would be reignited one by one. And it did that 5, 6, 7, 8 times, something like that. You're like you're living in a horror movie, but you're seeing it for real,
No, it sounds like it. I wanted to go back to the San Pedro house for a bit because a lot of things happening in there. And speaking of Jeff, you mentioned that he was hung in the attic. You literally hung by his neck in the attic. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that was a really perplexing and scary moment that happened there. When you watch the video, you can just see it, and his, like, all the color is drained from his face as he's coming down, and he has this strange wire with a funny knot. Can you tell us a little bit how that event went down?
That's right. It was a really scary night. That was on September 4th, 89. And what happened was, Jeff and another friend of mine named Gary Bain, Gary and I had gone to school together in Ohio. He was working with me part-time out here, and of course Jeff helped me out with audio and lighting and stuff for our video company. And we happened to be together that night, and we got this incredible call from Jackie Hernandez, which I recorded. And if you watch the documentary An Unknown Encounter, you can hear that actual audio recording. And Jackie was calling, and she said, "Oh my gosh, all hell was breaking loose." She said the kids' toys levitated. The door was opening and closing, slamming. A refrigerator opened, and a soft drink hurtled out of the refrigerator and hit her in the head. And she had been held down on the floor the night before, and she said that there was this invisible power that held her down the floor, and she couldn't breathe. And if it wasn't for the children being there, that the will to live for her children, she doesn't think she would have survived it. But she was able to break out of that energy state. And there was another night, not long before that, where she said that she was taking a bath, and that there were luminous balls of light, reddish color lights, and they were floating around her underwater while she was bathing. So all of these things sort of coalesced into this one night, September 4th, and all these things were happening. So Jeff and Gary and I decided we're going to go down and check it out for ourselves. And I grabbed my video equipment, and we went down there. And at that time, she had her children out on the front porch to protect them. I think she had a very small little girl at that time, baby daughter, and Samantha, and she was sleeping in a little bassinet thing. And Jamie was three. He also was bundled up on the front porch sleeping. And Jeff and Gary decided to go check out the attic. But when we got there, it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and it was very, very quiet. I mean, it was very tranquil. There was nothing going on. And I stayed down. I was talking with Jackie. I had the camera equipment there. Hadn't turned it on at that point. We had shot an interview with Jackie, but then back then the cameras were a lot bigger and they sucked up batteries a lot quicker. So I was kind of sort of waiting, to see if anything would happen, and not thinking anything would happen at that point because it was so quiet. And Jackie was soon joined by her neighbor, who she had called earlier, Susan, who we mentioned earlier, who had, actually seen a lamp fly across the room. They'd also heard a lot of activity, like strange noises in the attic and so forth. And they were up there maybe 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, and down below where I was with Jackie and Susan, I noticed a reddish-colored light, and it came across the attic crawl space and disappeared. It moved very quickly. And then to my left, I felt like I was being watched by something. And there was an open bathroom there, and didn't see anything, but you felt like you were being watched. And then all of a sudden, I got this feeling like something was about to happen, and then Susan, Jackie, and I, all three of us heard a snapping sound. It sounded like 3 finger snaps, just like you or I would do it, just like this, like three snaps.
Right.
And right at that point, I turned the camera on. I was yelling for those guys to come down. I said, "There's stuff going on down here." And Gary approached the opening, and Jeff was in the middle of the attic somewhere, and he had a flashlight when we went up there. I had given Gary a little point-and-shoot camera just in case anything would happen. And all of a sudden, as soon as I turned the camera on, we heard a groan, like that groan, loud groan. And Gary turned and said, "Are you okay?" And there's no response from Jeff. And he flashed his camera because it was so dark up there, because Jeff's flashlight had hit the floor and went out. And so fortunately, he was able to see where Jeff was, and he also got a couple of amazing photographs, because he found Jeff. His legs were wrapped around a 2x4, kind of on about a 45-degree angle, and his neck was pulled up close to a nail, which was protruding from one of the trusses, one of those 2x4s.
Right.
And when he got over to him, he could, Jeff was just out of it, and he found a rope around Jeff's neck. And it was an old weathered clothesline cord. twisted multiple times, tied in a bowline knot. None of us knew anything about knots at the time.
Wow.
And he had to bend the nail down and slip that knot off of the nail to get Jeff down. And of course, Jeff still got the rope around his neck, and he panics, he's crawling.
Mm-hmm.
And I have video camera rolling. Not really. When you see that footage in Unknown Encounter, I'm not aware of what I'm about to film. When we first heard the groan, we thought, well, maybe it was his camera being pulled out of his hands, or maybe he was pushed, because the very first night we were there, he had a camera pulled out of his hands, and he was pushed by something unseen. It felt like a large, bony hand. But this was something amazing, because something had come out of the darkness of the attic, had attacked him in a blinding second, and had a rope around his neck, and had it twisted around a nail, and just happened that quickly. So when he comes down, you see the terror etched into his face. You see the look of astonishment, and you can still see that cord. And I interviewed him right then and there, asked him when it happened. And of course, you can see the cord, and you can see some burn marks in his neck. And he was concerned at that point where his glasses were. He just bought a brand new pair of glasses that day, and they went flying off of him, I guess, at that moment of the assault. He also said something interesting. He said that when he came to on the rafter, that he felt something tugging on his leg, like it was trying to strangle him to death, like apply pressure.
Yeah.
And it was really an unforgettable night. It really was, because, here is a man that could very easily have been killed up there if Gary had pulled him down at that moment.
Yeah.
And people say, do you have any kind of evidence? Because, none of us saw him actually being hanged in the process of that. But I believe I do, because when we got back and looked at the videotapes, I started seeing these little pops of light, and they're all over the videotapes. I have 3 or 4 of them, really pronounced lights. And you can see one buzzing over the top of Jeff's head, one coming behind the doorway, one moving across the kitchen area. Mm-hmm. And they're self-luminescent lights. They're emitting their own light. And then, so yes, we do have evidence. And later on, by the way, that same night, we were on the porch getting ready to leave, and Jackie noticed that her baby daughter's forehead had a blood streak, like an imprint of, it looked like blood, coming off of the forehead. And when I have this on camera, I zoomed in, I could see the baby was fine, but it was almost like something had taken a thumbprint of blood and pressed it. But fortunately, the baby was okay. There was nothing harmful that happened to it other than that smudge, on the forehead. But what a night! What a night! What can I tell you? It was a scenario that no script writer could duplicate, and this one was for real.
Yeah, and with the cord wrapped around his neck, there seems to have been that connection to the sea and sailing again, because it was a specific type of sailor's knot, right?
That's right. That's right. And none of us knew anything about knots. Mm-hmm. And later on, I took that old weathered seaman's cord, or that old clothesline cord, rather. I took it to a man by the name of Luke Colgis was his name. He was like maybe late 80s. He'd been working as a seaman all his life, like a longshoreman type guy. And he confirmed that was indeed a bowline knot. It was definitely a seaman's knot used on ships, probably more than anywhere else in the world. And
wow.
It's a knot that doesn't slip. So it was a very dangerous knot. Jeff could have very easily have panicked at that moment. And if he had not, if Gary had not been there, I should say, he could have struggled, and he could have very easily strangled there right on that rafter that night.
Barry, one of the things that caught my attention, you made reference to it just a few minutes ago, is the little orbs of light flying around. You have worked with video equipment for many years now. How do you know that these orbs are not just, a malfunction in the equipment or a bug that flew in front of your lens? What are the characteristics of these little orbs of light that let you know that it was nothing that could be explained as a malfunction or a bug or any of those things?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question, Frank, because I wanted to know myself. And what we did was I got a hold of Keith Dovery at the time. He was a real well-known, respected entomologist, I first thought, well, is this some kind of a firefly or a bug or something? He analyzed the footage that I had, and I had multiple orbs of these lights. And he said, well, they're not bugs because of the way they move. The trajectories were too smooth, the way they move. Because he said most insects are more erratic kind of in their flight paths,
Okay.
And he did point out the fact that no fireflies are indigenous to Southern California. Now, I grew up in Southern Ohio. We used to put fireflies in milk jar or milk bottles and things like that, and make lanterns, things like that. And and they have fireflies have more of a pulsing kind of glow, on and off. And I also was lucky enough to get Dr. James Robin, who was one of the top aerospace physicists with Rockwell International at that time. He spent 2 or 3 weeks analyzing all of the original tapes that I had and looked at the lights. And he went on national television at the time, a show called Current Affair, I remember. And he vetted the lights and talked about the fact that they were self-luminescent lights, and again, the speeds were very, very fast, and that may be why we didn't see them, because they move so fast.
Right.
And they were glowing. Not all of them, I would say, were all that bright, but most of them were very bright. I also had in another location where Jackie moved an incredible series of lights that are moving all around Jackie's head. And you can see this one, I call it the pea pod light, because it comes in, it looks like it has 3 appendages. It's whitish, bright white in color. It comes in, again, looking like a pea pod, dematerializes for one frame. It's you can see it materially for 1 or 2 frames and disappears for a frame, rematerializes in the 4th or 5th frame, and then continues traversing out of the frame. And then you could see all of these little sharp, bright white lights moving all around Jackie, even going into her head. And that was in one scene in one location. And it was in broad daylight. It wasn't even at night. It was in bright, broad daylight,
Wow.
which was really phenomenal. But again, we were vetted by entomologists, and Dr. Robin was very, very kind in his analysis, and when I say kind, I mean he took the time to do it on his own. Was not paid anything to do this. No receipt or paid anything. And I just wanted to find out, as a journalist would go through all this stuff, this data, and find out if there was some kind of rational explanation for it. There was one light in particular. I didn't see it with the naked eye. Again, a lot of times you did not see them with the naked eye, most of the time. And there was a gate in the morning. There was this gate, and it was a waffle kind of gate. It used to be there on the side of the house. It's not there now, but because I've been back in recent years, it's no longer there. But the gate started opening and closing by itself, and there was absolutely no breeze, no wind at all. And as I walked over, I got the thing opening and closing in very close-up shots. And when we look back on the video, you see this bright orange, a beam of light coming across. It almost looks like it has some kind of a mass to it, physical mass to it. And it comes across. As it comes across, the gate opens and closes.
Wow.
So again, there seemed to be a correlation between these lights and physical psychokinetic phenomena, like, for instance, the hanging and other things that were phenomenal. The night of the Ouija board, we did not, our cameras were knocked out, but just prior to that, we picked up an amazing light flying into the storage shed, a very large greenish-orange object flying into that shed.
I remember watching the piece of footage with the gate, and yeah, I mean, this thing is literally swinging back and forth on its own. It was really astounding to watch. Speaking of analysis and data, there was another incident that happened in the San Pedro house that I find totally, I mean, it baffles me. And that's it was like this liquid that was coming through the walls and the cabinets. And it almost reminded me of ectoplasm from the Ghostbuster movies. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I know you guys collected some of this and sent it off to get analyzed, and the results were quite interesting, to say the least.
That was, maybe beyond anything else, that was really bizarre because that happened on August 28th, and it was an interesting night because we had a lot of researchers there that night. There were other people that came out. By this time, word of mouth had gotten around. This was before the hanging incident, actually, but it was the first night we went there. We had a lot of phenomena happen. And word of mouth through a lot of Dr. Taft's friends got around, and I remember sort of like almost like a party that night. It was really weird because I walked in there. There was all these people. There was a guy named, I can't think of the gentleman's name now, but he brought in what they call a Cohu camera from San Diego, which shot in the IR realm, with an infrared camera. Another guy brought a thermal vision unit, and that was rare to see that back in 1989. You see a lot of that now, but not back then. You didn't see so much of that. And all these people were around. People were chatting about it, and there was absolutely nothing happening. Nothing was going on until it was probably like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. By that time, most of the people had weeded out of the place and had left, and there were like a handful of us there. There was Jeff and I, a fellow named Robert Moss was there, and Jackie, of course, Susan. I remember them being there. And I believe it was Jackie or Susan, they suddenly pointed to the wall cabinet. It was a wall cabinet right there in the living room, right before you go into the kitchen. And in the wall cabinet, there was this liquid slime that started, like the walls were sweating this stuff. It was like dripping, drippings. It was like a fluorescent orange, yellowish color to it. And I had the video camera rolling. I turned it on rather quickly, and Jeff's got a flashlight on it, and I walked over there and zoomed in on it. And it was this stuff just kind of dripping and oozing up through the cracks of the wall cabinet. And actually, some of there weren't even cracks. It was just a smooth painted surface. And again, it was like the walls were sweating this stuff. And I know there was another incident. I'm not sure if it was the same night or not, but I know it was coming up out of the floorboards back in the hallway. There was a little bathroom there, and there was a hallway outside of that bathroom, like a small, actually not a hallway, closet area, and it was coming up out of the floorboards. And again, we couldn't find a source for that. Dr. Taft had a friend at UCLA that moonlighted for us and did a little bit of lab research and did an analysis. And I remember Taft calling me and telling me over the phone that what they found was that this liquid ooze was some kind of human blood plasma with a heavy iodine and copper element to it, which was interesting because we smelled that iodine the first night, so it tied in with the iodine smell. And I'm not sure why the iodine smell would have been there, or even part of that blood plasma, but it was, I believe he determined it to be from an older male, I believe that's what he said. But that was really eerie, and I know Jackie had described seeing the stuff kind of appear on the outside of other cabinets in the kitchen and on the outside of drinking glasses and things like that. And this time we got a sample of it that he had taken to a lab near UCLA, and that was really bizarre.
Have you heard of this happening anywhere else to anybody else?
I had heard of it happening. The only other case that comes to mind was, and it's a controversial case because some people are very critical of the case, but it was the original Amityville Horror House. And that place was supposedly haunted. I know a lot of people said it was a hoax, but I don't know. I think there's a fine line between hoax and reality sometimes in these cases. I know that there was a couple named Ed and Lorraine Warren. I believe they're the ones that reported that they had seen a slime there, and the family reported it. I'm not sure if any samples were taken. I assume there were. I'm not sure. But I don't know that was human blood plasma. But I do know them reporting seeing like a blood-like substance coming out of the walls of that house. And there are other instances where poltergeist will generate water in liquids and things of that nature. There was even in the San Pedro case, before we arrived on the scene, there was a report by Jackie. She said she was walking from the living room into the kitchen, right near where that wall cabinet was, there was an electrical light switch.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that water just started pouring out
Wow.
of the light switch.
Oh, wow.
Yet the light switch worked fine, but yet there was water pouring out of it. You think it would have shorted out or something. you know?
Right.
Mm-hmm. I was gonna say, I've joined a few ghost investigations in the past, and one of my worries is always that I may take something home with me. Something might end up attaching itself to me and haunting me or my home. What are your thoughts on that and past experiences with that?
That's a good question, Genevieve. Really great question. I at the time, when I first got involved in that case, and any other case prior to that,
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about ghosts following you or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But in this situation, this ghost became a have ghosts will travel story. Indeed it did. Because we even believe that perhaps the first night we were there, that was the night Jeff went up in the attic, he had his camera pulled out of his hands. We had lights go on and off in the house. He had taken his roll of film. We had left and went down to Hollywood to get something to eat. It was late at night, and he took it and put it into one of those overnight slots at a photo lab called Allen's Custom Photos down in Hollywood. And the next day, they didn't know where the film was because we wanted to find out if he got anything on his pictures
Yeah.
from the first night.
Mm-hmm.
And they eventually found the roll of film all the way on the other side of the building, lying in the middle of the lab floor, and none of them had put it there. Also, to make it even more pronounced than that, in the summer of 1990, or actually before this even, Jackie went up to Weldon, and she was followed up there. And, of course, we saw it levitate a guy in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
We knew what had happened up there. And then during the summer of 1990, at that time, I had an apartment in Studio City. Tahunga Avenue. It was at 4285 Tahunga Avenue, right near Vitello's restaurant where all the Robert Blake thing happened. It was really close to that by coincidence.
Okay.
But the burners on my stove started coming on by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it was the right front gas burner. You turn it off, you walk out of a room, come back in, the burner would be back on. It would play all these kinds of games with you. It would impale knives in the floor. It turned flashlights on. Like it would put the flashlight on the floor, turn it on. You'd hear heavy breathing sounds. So I knew I was being followed by it. And that culminated with an incredible night of December 4th, 1990. We had 46 poltergeist events witnessed by myself and Gary and Jeff. We had come back from a job and we had all these things happening at one time. We had the burners come on. It set a fire to an envelope. And we had to put the fire out. It threw bullets onto the stove. The flashlight, like I mentioned, was put onto the floor and turned on. Just all these little psychokinetic things happened. It would do things like, if you'd open your refrigerator, let's say you have condiments in the refrigerator like mayonnaise and mustard. It would take the bottles and turn them upside down. It would go into the bathroom and turn the shampoo bottles upside down. These are all little hash marks that it was there, that it was visiting you. And there was a point where I didn't see it, but I just walked out of the room and this thing appeared to Jeff and Gary. They saw this like human-like slab of light that appeared, and it appeared just for seconds, and it appeared floating in the middle of the room, and it floated through the wall into the bedroom. And when we went into the bedroom later on to see if there was anything in there, we didn't see the slab of light, but we were pelted with coins and objects and things that came out of nowhere. Wow. Can they follow you? Yes, they can.
Yeah, and I was going to say it's incredible that you actually caught some of this on camera, the incidents with, the scissors in the kitchen and the fire coming on, and at one point even finding a pack of matches on the stove, I believe.
Well, what it did was we were just walking out of the room because we knew the entity was there. We tried to stay together. We were walking out of the room. We'd go from room to room, and with the camera rolling, and just behind me, it was always usually just out of sight because it was always very much wanting to be mischievous and play these games with you and just be one step ahead of you.
Yeah.
We heard this loud crash, and we turned the camera around quickly. I turned the camera behind me, and it had taken a box of 22 caliber bullets. And these are bullets. There was no mystery to the bullets. I owned the bullets. I had a 22 rifle for protection because we had a number of break-ins in that apartment complex last few months. But I had a rifle. I kept it in the bedroom in the corner, and I had a little box of 22 shells, and they were put away in a drawer. And gun was not loaded or anything, but this entity had taken that little box of bullets and had slammed them down onto the right front burner. But fortunately, the burner was not turned on at that moment. But then the bullets went flying out of the box and were scattered all over the floor. I remember the first thing Jeff said, "Boy, we better get these bullets off that stove and off the floor," and because who knows what this thing would do next,
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about, obviously this thing was in your apartment doing all of these things. How did you get rid of it? Did you cleanse it? Did you move? But what happened?
Well, I didn't cleanse it. At that time, I really didn't know too many psychics that were available. Although there was one lady that professed to be a psychic. Her name was Barbara, but she may have come over once, maybe, and saged the place, but it didn't have much of an effect. We still got a lot of activity. It never would do anything when she came over, but it was more of a hit and run ghost. When I mean hit and run, one night, like I woke up and a window had shattered, and then that was it. Nothing after that, and you come home, say from work, and you have a number of things that would happen. Burners would come on, this kind of thing, or to put a cordless stone up on top of a lampshade, something like that. Or you might hear the breathing and things of that nature, but then it would stop. It would usually do things later in the evening, into the wee hours, but then it would stop. And usually by morning, you'd have no activity. That wasn't always true, but most of the time, that's the way it worked. I do remember being frightened by it. I mean, I was scared because, this was after the hanging incident. I thought, well, if it can hang a guy, what's it going to do to me next? Fortunately, it never harmed me. I really was respectful that it didn't do that. But I remember many nights sleeping on the floor by the front door, thinking I was going to have to make a quick escape, from the phenomena, because you didn't really know how violent this thing could be at that point. But again, I didn't know too many people in the psychic world at that time. Now I do know more people. I would have tried to bring in more people today and more witnesses and so forth. But it was scary. It was really frightening, but it did follow us for sure.
Yeah, no, it's very, very frightening, to say the least. Now, my next question, or my next couple of questions, might be a bit more on the technical side. Obviously, you have worked with cameras, and you've seen the transition we have made from tapes to digital mediums, like, the SD cards, recording everything on digital cameras. Have you noticed a difference in how you capture this type of paranormal evidence? Do you see less paranormal phenomena that gets captured? Is it about the same, or how do you see it?
Actually, I think I'm seeing more today, more out there being captured, because the big difference, back at the time in 1989, from cameras then as today, from a broadcast standpoint, I was doing more broadcast work. We had a format back then called 3/4 inch video. And the problem with that was that the batteries wouldn't last that long. You might, if you're lucky, you might get 20, 25 minutes out of a battery. And not only that, the tapes were only 20 minutes in length.
Oh, wow.
They were kind of big, and you had a deck. You had to put the tape into a deck, and then the deck had an umbilical cable that ran up to the camera, and that made it a little more cumbersome. They were bigger, they were bulkier. Today, it's amazing because you got all this digital technology. You could take an SD card and put it into a camera, and depending on the, like say if you have a 64 gigabyte SD card, you can run for 4 to 6 hours, depending on frame rate and how many megabytes per second you're recording that. So today it's amazing. I wish I had that back then, because we would have been able to set up more cameras and let more cameras roll continuously. Back then, I remember thinking, well, I've just got this one camera, and I'm thinking, boy, I've got to preserve that camera power. What if something starts happening? And all of a sudden my juice runs out, or my tape runs out, so you could switch tapes, but it took a little while. It wasn't instant. You'd have to load it up and put it in, have to thread up and So I'm amazed today. One of the things about today, too, is that compared to film, film was more costly to shoot back then.
Right.
In still cameras. But today you can shoot, like, again, with a digital card, an SD card, or a compact flash card, you can shoot forever and so many pictures on a camera and keep firing away. There is one thing I want to mention, though. I think there is something about the flash of the camera that attracts the phenomena more. It just seems like the flash, I don't know whether it invites it in more, but I know that a lot more people are capturing orbs and mist and things like that with the flash. Of course, it helps to have the flash when you're in the dark, otherwise you're not going to see a whole lot. But I think there's something about the flash that's helpful. I was at a place called Cottage Grove Cemetery. It's not far from Weldon where we talked about seeing that levitation. I was on another job in another area up there one time, and I knew about this old cemetery. And I stopped up there one time just to check it out. Not too much happened at all, really. And as I was leaving the cemetery, I thought, well, I'll take a couple more, digital pictures, with the flash. And it also helps to talk to spirits, I think. And I asked permission of the ghost themselves. I said, well, I haven't seen it too much here, but I'm asking your permission. If you're here, could you give me a sign? And so I took like 4 or 5 photographs consecutively in the camera before I left. And right out front of the cemetery gates with a sign that says Cottage Grove Cemetery. And you can see in the first picture, lights start moving towards the camera. Then the second picture, more lights. By the fourth or fifth picture, they're unbelievable. There are thousands of them everywhere. And huge basketball-sized lights glowing above the gate. And I've never gotten so many lights. Now, you have to be careful when you take pictures because obviously you can get false anomalies. So you have to watch if there's any wind kicking up dust. Well, that night there was not a speck of wind. There was no rain in the air. Rain and snow can create reflections. You can get reflections off of the flash, especially snow will create a flash effect. But again, we had a pristine environment, and because I asked permission of the ghosts, I think the ghosts do hear us. Obviously, if we were doing a Ouija board seance with it, and it was responding directly to the Ouija board with physical phenomena, that was amazing. Obviously, they can hear us, to some degree. So, but the camera technology is amazing today, and I think that more and more people are picking up things, and because you can keep the cameras on longer, you have more access to more cameras, and everybody has got a medium of shooting in the palm of their hand now with the cell phone.
True.
And so that it makes it more ubiquitous, and everybody's got this technology now, and so more and more phenomena is being picked up and recorded. The problem is you have to weed through the stuff that's out there because there's so many Photoshop things now. It's so easy to digitally enhance pictures and create effects and things. So you got to be very careful with that aspect of it. And that's what I try to be. I should be very careful. You want to make sure you're properly vetted. The thing is, if it's an individual that shoots something, okay, that's questionable because there's just an individual that can tell you about that experience and that set of photographs or video. But when you have something that is of a communal nature, when more and more people are recipients to the phenomena, then that's more impressive to me. But again, you have to be going back to the 5 W's of journalism: the what, when, where, when, how, or whatever it is. They say you have to explore every little nook and cranny, use a journalistic approach, every avenue, and go using the kind of taking a forensics approach to it. And you have to be the same way with not only the testimony of witnesses, but also with the evidence that's been captured.
a lot of your work has been featured on TV programs. You've covered quite a number of paranormal cases throughout your career. At the top of the interview, you were talking about how back then with Jackie, you know, this was a topic that, you know, people weren't discussing openly. Fast forward to today, we have countless paranormal TV shows and paranormal groups are popping up every day. How have you seen paranormal TV change the paranormal research? Because I feel that a lot of times when people watch a TV show, they're kind of just getting the highlights. And I've been on several investigations where, you know, you kind of have to sit around a lot. And I feel like that may have given people a false sense of what to expect when they go, you know, hoping to capture this type of evidence. But you as a professional that's been doing this for quite a while, how have you seen the paranormal change, you know, the way people think about ghosts and what their expectations are when they go out looking for haunted places? Yeah,
well, here's the thing. You know, there's a lot of television shows out there today, and the only thing that kind of, I mean, I'm not saying it's not a good thing. I think it is a good thing. It's good to have groups that go out and they investigate things. The thing that kind of irritating to me, you have to watch all of the follow through the house, and a lot of times before a commercial break, what's that? You know, oh, did you hear that? It's almost like there's a director sometimes behind the scenes pulling the string,
right?
And they kind of hype it up a little bit. I'm not saying that all cases are like that they're always hyping it, but you know, it leaves some of it in question in my mind, you know, whether or not, to what degree directors are influencing some of these researchers. But then again, there's a lot of good researchers out there that are doing a lot of credible work and trying to get to the truth of the matter. I'm all for research in it. The only thing that I would do get a little bit leery of is that when you see someone that goes out and it's almost seems like every time they go around a corner, they've gotten something or they've heard something or this and that. I have not had that experience where it's just that readily happening all of the time. I found it to be more of a guessing game, a waiting game. And boy, when something does happen, it can be really exhilarating. And it is really exhilarating when something happens. Right. But in my personal experience, I haven't found a haunted house where I've walked into and it looked like Amityville, and where things are flying around and, you know, everything's happening all at one time. I found it to be a great waiting game. In the San Pedro case, that case went on for about a year and a half. And yes, there were incredible things that happened. There was the hanging, the levitation. There was, you know, all these other things, but it didn't happen all at one time. It was, again, the first night was pretty amazing because we did have a lot of things go on the first night, but that was rare. It's rare when you have a preponderance phenomenon happening all at one time. Again, there are places out there, I'm sure, that can be a little more conducive to that, you know, especially the age of place, especially if there's been a trauma, like Gettysburg Battlefield is a good place to go. I mean, there's been amazing things recorded there. But again, I'm a little bit leery when someone goes into a place and they try to, it seems like every turn of the corner you're getting, what's that, you know, or
right.
Some of these Bigfoot shows, you know, did you see that? Did you see it? But rarely do you see it. You know, I want to see it. That's why when I go out on the case, I will not put out anything unless I think it's got some kind of substance to it. Right. You know, some substance to it. And I think EVP is a real common way people are picking up a lot of things. And there's a lot of really good EVPs out there. Right. There are phenomenal things being picked up. I think that EVP, the language of EVP, the recordings of EVP, though, are a lot more in question because, as you know, a lot of things can get on the tape. Yeah. It depends on how pristine the environment is, you know, how controlled the environment is. That's why I really prefer the video medium, because if you have something on video, there's a lot more data there. You can actually see it and really analyze it from there. Not to say you can't fake video. Video can be faked. It's faked a lot, but you have a lot more parameters to work with when you see something on video. But then again, I don't know. You know, again, there's a lot of good people out there doing a lot of serious research in the area. But I think a lot of it's copycat now. I think so many shows that look like the other show I've seen, you know. But in the element that I'm reaching out for in my own personal work, I'm looking out for the best pieces of evidence. And recently, I found, I think, is one of the best pieces of evidence.
Really?
And that was just highlighted on a show that I produced called Case Files Unknown that aired September 5th on the channel, on the Destination America channel. And I believe it's been repeated a couple times. And I must tell you about this story. It is probably the most interesting piece of documentation I've ever laid eyes on. We've got an officer, a police officer, a very credible police officer. His name is Officer Brian Coyle, and he lives in the St. Paul, Minnesota area. We were talking about cameras a little while ago. Well, this gentleman has been sitting on a series of photographs that were taken on film with flash back in 1984. So you can do the math on that. How many years ago is that? That's about 30 years ago or so. So,
Yeah.
You know, he had these pictures. We heard about them. Victoria Gross, who was a supervising producer on a show that we did years ago called My Ghost Story, we had heard about it at that time. She had a friend named Echo Bodine, who was a researcher who lives in that area, and she was writing a book about the soul, and heard that someone at the police department in St. Paul had these pictures of a soul that was captured at a fatal crash site. And when I first saw these pictures, well, it just takes your breath away because you'll never see anything like them again. I don't think. It's very rare to find them. There was a young boy. His name was John Bawar. And in 1984, he was on his way to a concert with a group of kids. They were going to a concert. Unfortunately, it was a foggy night, and they slammed into a tree on a curvy road near. It was actually on Edgecombe Road, right near Highline Golf Course. It's a very wooded area. The officers, there were two officers, they were not far. They were less than a mile away. They responded to the call. And when they got to this location, I believe it was a Jeep they were in, or not a Jeep, it was like an SUV type of vehicle, I believe. It was slammed into this tree, and the gentleman took, the officer, Coyle, took photographs, processed the scene, and unfortunately, they found the boy had hit the windshield on the impact, and it snapped his neck. So when after the scene had been processed, and this is like 3 or 4 days later, Brian got a call from a police laboratory that handled the photograph, the photo lab. And they called him in, and they said, what the heck is this in your photographs? And he looked at the photos, and he had not a clue. And you could see all these striations, like streaks of light, circumventing the crash site, coming all around the vehicle, circling the tree. Very bright whites, reds, greens, that kind of thing, especially whites and reds, as I recall. These little candy striped lights coming all the way around the tree. And there's a shot of the boy's body laying face down on the side on the front seat, and you can see these lines of energy, streaks of energy emitting from his body. That's pretty incredible. But the most incredible photograph of all, you see a wide shot of the car, and just above the car is in an enlarged shot. I mean, it looks larger than his normal head would look, but it's clearly the boy's face above the car materializing.
Wow.
And he's looking down on the car about where the body is, and he's screaming. It looks like he's saying no. I mean, who knows for sure, but he's screaming. He's very, very upset. It looks as if he's now out of his body. The soul is leaving the body. It's on his way to wherever that afterlife is, or wherever that dimension of reality is. And he's not happy about it. But he's got all these first 5 or 6 incredible photographs. But the best one is this boy's face, and it's got the same hair, everything. It is the same person is lying dead in that vehicle, and he's appeared over the car. It's not fuzzy. It's not indistinct. It's as clear as a bell. It's an amazing picture.
We actually pulled up the pictures here from the Destination America Facebook page, I believe. I got chills. I am not lying to you. I literally got chills looking at these.
I think the pictures are on the Case Files Unknown Facebook page as well. There's some of the striations that can be seen.
No, that is a fascinating case.
It really is, and it's interesting because when the officer, when the body was taken away, the officer had other photographs, and they're completely normal. He's got other shots of the car and everything, but once the body was removed, there was none of those streaks of light or anything, at the scene. And so I just think he was just in the right place at the right time. The boy had just expired. And, God knows why, but he got these amazing pictures, and I'm so glad you were able to see those pictures. They really are fascinating photographs.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that kind of evidence I'm looking for when I go out.
Honestly, anyone that browses your credits on IMDb or looks up your work on YouTube, some of the stuff that's on there, I think the consensus is pretty clear that you do seem to focus on cases that, as you said, have substance. I know you also did a documentary called California's Most Haunted. Obviously, the state of California is quite an interesting place with quite a colorful yet checkered history. And you discuss many cases in that documentary, but one of the things that I guess I'm surprised, if I may use the word, to see absent is anything on Bigfoot, being that, Bigfoot is quite popular in the Northern California area. Is there a reason why you haven't looked into Bigfoot, or maybe you haven't? Maybe it's just not listed in your credits.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. No, I didn't do that in California's Most Haunted because we mainly dealt just with haunting stories. But I have not yet done a Bigfoot story. However, I am a believer in Bigfoot.
Okay.
I am a believer. I did go out on one hunt one time with a friend of mine named Bob Schott, who claimed he had an experience in Central California, but I didn't see anything. Not to say that there wasn't anything to it, but after studying a lot of the research, I really believe that there's something to it because there's just too many sightings by too many credible people for it not to be something real high strength. The big question is, why they don't find a carcass or something like that. But who's to say? Maybe they bury their dead. I don't know. Right. But I remember working news in Colorado years ago, back in the early '80s, and some people hikers found a plane, a single-engine plane that had gone down in the 30s with a skeleton inside of its pilot. And I thought, here was 50-some years later, and you know how big and fast the Pacific Northwest is, and Canada. There's a lot of sightings in Canada. So who's to say something can't hide out? And it was very evasive for some reason and knows where to hide, knows the best places to hide. There is a case mentioned in Canada that really intrigues me. There's I believe that Monster Quest may have done a story on it. It was very intriguing. There was a fishing cabin on Snellgrove Lake up there. In about, I would say this happened within the last 8 or 9 years. The people that own the cabin, by the way, it's a very remote fishing lake. It's almost like an island up there. I believe you have to land on by pontoon plane to get to the location. They found their cabin trash, and I believe they had food in the refrigerator of the cabin, but it didn't look like any signs of bear entry, because a bear could smell food through anything. They can rip up the top of your car if they feel that there's a picnic basket in there. If they wanted to, they can open up like a sardine can, Right. But they put out a nail board with a screw board with screws in it, and they put it in the front, and they knew there was not going to be anybody up there. Like, again, it's remote, and it was not being rented out, and they know when somebody's going to be up there. It's the only thing on that island, I believe, is the northern Ontario area. And they got a footprint. Something put its foot down on that nail board or that screw board, and it was about a 12 to 14-inch foot.
Wow.
In length. That was very impressive, and I believe they took some DNA samples of that, and they still are not certain. It's not exactly an ape and not exactly a human. Some kind of a cross between those two DNAs. I believe
that's incredible.
Yeah, that's a good case, because they took another crew up from LA there. They took a camera crew up there. They set up everything. They set up infrared cameras everywhere, and they thought, well, they knew they had a pretty good location for Bigfoot. And again, even with all that equipment, this reminded me of poltergeist cases because it was very invasive. They couldn't get anything on camera when they set this up. They were up there for several days. However, the cabin in the middle of the night, even with all of those cameras set up, was pelted by rockfalls, strange rockfalls. The rocks were hitting the roof of this cabin.
Oh, wow.
So do I believe that there's something out there? You bet. You bet I do. And there's a guy named Jeff Meldrum. He's a very good researcher in this field. I know he's written a number of books, and he takes a very scientific approach. And there's a place up in Washington, I believe it's called Snookums Meadows, and they found really, really convincing footprints evidence, and they've studied the epidural nature of the footprints, and they're convinced that there's definitely got to be something to it. But why it's so evasive, that's anybody's guess. But is there something out there? Absolutely.
Well, we're on the topic of cryptids, like Bigfoot. One of the phenomena that I've heard a lot about, but personally I find myself still on the fence a bit on, is this issue of Mothman, which a lot of people have claimed to have seen. Have you looked into this, and what have you found? What are your thoughts? Do you think the Mothman phenomenon holds water?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know this is going to sound strange. All this stuff does, but right. I grew up in Southern Ohio when all of these things were happening back in the '60s. I was in high school then. There was a documentary film that I shot that I have never released. There were a set of circumstances. It's kind of a long story to get into now, but I did a couple of shows back in the early 2000s. It was called Monsters of the UFO. I covered a couple other famous old-time UFO cases. But the Mothman is something that I remembered from reading the Cincinnati Enquirer newspaper on a daily basis, before I go to school. That was just my thing. I'd read the newspaper and go to school. Right. We didn't have the internet then. Right. And there was a creature, and I did a lot of investigation on this. There was a creature that was spotted on November 15th, 1966, kind of a Lover's Lane area. It's in a place called the TNT area. Mm-hmm. It's in a place called Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And Point Pleasant is a beautiful area. If you go there today, you would look like you stepped back 100 years because the town is pristine. It looks like something from the 1800s, and it's got the old hotel there, and it's just an amazing place. But there was two couples. It was Linda Scarberry and her husband Roger, and then there was Steve and Mary Mallett, I believe was their name. And they were kind of just hanging out, cruising, like along the Lover's Lane. They're out in the outskirts of this TNT area. The TNT area, because the government used to make dynamite in that area during World War II, and there were these old bunkers that's still out there that are abandoned with to keep stuff. And they came across, because I interviewed Linda. She's passed on now. I got an interview at her home years ago, and they were driving along, and they saw this creature standing along the side of the road with wings, and its wing caught in a guide wire that comes down from say a telephone pole or something like that to the ground to hold the pole to give support to the pole. It was some kind of couple of guide wires. It was entangled in a guide wire. Now, at least it looked like the creature was kind of struggling there with this, moving its wing back and forth in this wire. And they stopped the car. They didn't know what it was at first, and it turned and looked at it, and it had glowing red eyes. Wow. They immediately made a quick U-turn, got on a highway, I believe it's Highway 62 there. It's a old country road. It goes back towards Point Pleasant, which is a very small little town. And this thing suddenly came up behind them. It started flying after them. So apparently it didn't have as much of a problem with its wing as they thought, and it came after them. But it was a humanoid shape like a man. They really couldn't see the neck area. It was very, very dark, but they could see this head with glowing red eyes, and it was the most terrifying thing they'd ever seen, with a 10-foot wingspan. And it flew up to 100 miles an hour, kept pace with the car. It actually shot out in front of them at one point. Wow. and they saw it a little later on sitting up on top of a billboard and stared down at them. Anyway, it sounds like a cartoon fantasy, the story, but if you talk to the people and look back at what was going on, it's one of the most fascinating things that I've ever covered, because within a year's period of time, from 1966 to December of 1967, over 100 people reported seeing the same thing.
Oh, wow.
In different situations. And this thing, too, could follow people at times. One man saw it standing in the middle of a cornfield, and it just shot straight up. It didn't make a sound, just shot straight up into the sky. And one lady saw it looking in her window at night as she went to bed, and could see the wings and so forth, illuminated enough from the inside window. And there was a policeman named Alvy Sullivan. I believe he left. He actually moved across to Gallipolis, Ohio, because it was so unnerving. And what made the story really unique and scary, super scary, is that there was not only sightings of this creature, but there was a whole plethora of UFO sightings connected with it. There were hundreds of UFO sightings up and down the Ohio River Valley during that year's period. And a lot of times the UFO sightings coincided with sightings of Mothman.
Oh, wow.
And there was a gentleman, author named John Keel. John eventually came to write a book called The Mothman Prophecies, and it later became a movie starring Richard Gere. It came out about, 10, 12 years ago. It wasn't the movie was interesting from a standpoint of the fact that weird things were going on at Point Pleasant, but it didn't get into much about the UFO sightings. And I thought that was a really important part, because John, when he went from New York down there, he started living with some of the families, the witnesses. They let him stay there for a while, for several weeks or even longer. And he started doing firsthand research, and he never saw Mothman, but he saw dozens of UFOs coming right in at treetop level and cruising down the Ohio River Valley and so forth. But this creature was seen, like I say, by over 100 people. They all described it the same way. It flew at incredible velocities, and it had the glowing red eyes. That seemed to be the main thing that people described with the glowing red eyes. On December 15th, 1967, or actually I should say December 14th, 67, there were two men coming across the old Silver Bridge, and as they were approaching the bridge at twilight, they claimed that they saw something roosting up on the top of the bridge. It looked like a humanoid figure with wings and glowing red eyes, and it flew off the bridge at a heartbeat. The next day, on December 15th, 1967, that bridge collapsed. Mm-hmm. It was a very cold time. I remember that weather being extremely cold. It was probably 10 degrees, something like that at the time, close to zero. And about 46 people died. It plunged into the icy depths of the Ohio River during the collapse of the Silver Bridge. No one ultimately knew why the bridge collapsed, but I think the prosaic explanation was that it was a faulty eyeball in the bridge. But what makes it interesting is that the creature, the Mothman creature, was seen by these two truck drivers the night before, sitting on top of the bridge. And it had been seen in abundance all that year prior, starting with November 15th, 1966, by the Scarberries and Mallets out in Point Pleasant. Mm-hmm. And after the bridge collapsed, the Mothman sightings sort of dissipated. There have been other reports in other parts of the world, even in England, in several forests there, where people have seen similar things. But for the most part, the sightings dissipated at that time. So the question is whether or not it was some harbinger of doom, harvester of souls, whatever it is, no one really knows. I think John Keel called it an ultra-terrestrial, as opposed to the common term as extraterrestrial, where it's not necessarily something from outer space. It may be an occupier of a separate dimension of our own that inhabits a quasi-world of spirit, maybe half spirit, half something else that no one has any explanation for. And so far, we know, I mean, in quantum physics, that there are other dimensions of reality. At least that's what science is saying now. So who knows what inhabits these other realms? And is this some kind of a crossover from that realm into our three-dimensional reality? I don't know. But it was one of the strangest stories because so many people were terrified. By when I spoke with Linda Scarberry, you could just see the fear in her eyes. You knew something had happened, and she was among that first group of people in that car who had been chased by this thing.
No, I remember reading a theory that, like you said, the Mothman might be foretelling the future somehow. It's been associated with several other disasters across the world. And I find it incredible that actually just last year there have been several reports in Southeast Asia, especially in Singapore, of the Mothman, which is very strange. It's suddenly there's an influx of sightings by various different people. So I don't know if you've looked into that.
No, I will. I will look into it. I know there was another kind of a weird phenomenon down in Mexico. Over the last 15 years or so. I don't know about recently. There was a thing called the flying humanoid sightings. They were these creatures. They've been videotaped over certain villages in Mexico. And near Guadalupe, back about, 12, 15 years ago, there was a police officer said he saw a creature, a flying creature of some kind that looked like an old woman, really like a witch, if you want to put it into a more simplistic term, like a witch that was hovering and then suddenly flew down and landed on his patrol car in the middle of the night and tried to reach around and grab him with these terrible claws, that kind of thing. But I've seen the video of him shaking. His knees and legs are just shaking, and they say he was a very credible officer. But other people videotaped those same kinds of things in Mexico, even that day of that sighting. So unlike Mothman, there was not any glowing red eyes, but there was a sighting of a female looking like Mothman or Moth Girl, I guess you'd call it, during the Vietnam War by several soldiers right before a battle where a lot of people were killed. So getting back to that prophecy element to it, maybe it is some kind of harbinger. Who knows? It's really fascinating.
Wow, Barry. I hate it because I feel like time just slips between my fingers here every time that we're lucky enough to have a guest like you that's so great and full of information and anecdotes and personal experiences. We could be here all night talking to you. For the people that want to learn more about you and the stuff that you've covered in the past, where can people go? Do you have a website or YouTube, any links like that?
Yeah, I believe there's a YouTube channel called Barry Conrad's Unknown Encounters. They can go to that. And my website that I really have more or less for my production work, I'm a professional director, photography, cameraman, is www.barconvideoproductions.com.
Very cool.
BARCONVideoProductions.com.
And people also can get, not only do you do video work, you also have a book out on the San Pedro Haunting called An Unknown Encounter, True Account of the San Pedro Haunting. Can people still get this book on Amazon or anything like that?
Yes. Yeah, it's available on Amazon. And all they got to do is just type in An Unknown Encounter, A True Account of the San Pedro Haunting, and they can find it easily on Amazon. You bet. Awesome.
Barry Conrad was our guest. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. This has been a whole lot of fun and a whole lot of spooky, if I may say so myself.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I really enjoyed talking about these stories, and the search for the truth keeps going on, and I'm always looking to if anyone else has anything new in that area or has something they want to share, I'm more than happy to be able to talk with them and see what they got.
Well, hey, I should send you a couple of videos I got of some weird orbs flying around me that actually remind me a lot of what you saw at the San Pedro Haunting. It could be dust, it could be nothing, it could be something. Maybe I'll pass this along to you.
Okay. Really looking forward to it. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Barry.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
That was our interview with Barry Conrad, paranormal filmmaker, producer of some interesting programs that we definitely encourage people to check out. Like he mentioned, there's a YouTube channel out there. That being said, we're going to sign off. It was a really fascinating interview. I hope that everybody enjoyed listening to that. If you missed any part of it, definitely check out the website, WOTRradio.com. During the week, we'll be posting that, as well as having that up on our YouTube channel now. So if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, do that. We have some interviews up there, some videos, some cool stuff. And as always, you can sign up for our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, all that good stuff. That being said, as always, I'm Engineer Frank on Twitter, West of the Rockies on Facebook, Genevieve Uway on Twitter. Don't forget to follow the show on Twitter. That's at WOTR Radio. And as I just mentioned, the website is WOTRradio.com. Take care, be safe, God bless. Don't do anything too crazy. We want to see you back next week. Enjoy this one. See you next week, guys. Bye-bye.
West of the Rockies with Frank the Engineer on the Independent FM, Los Angeles.